Hello everyone. Today is the lecture number 9 of Engineering Economy. In the previous class, we have finished the chapter 3. It's all about the techniques to estimate the cost. And we said cost estimating is the foundation of chapter 4 and 5. The reason why we say that is in chapter 4, you will learn cash flow diagrams, which will describe your cash flow incomes and outcomes during the lifespan of your project. And the cash flow income could be the revenue, right? And we have learned that how to calculate the revenue in chapter 2. But cash outflows will be the costs. Maybe the costs every year, the costs every month. It depends on how you divide the unit of the time during lifespan. But if you want to have a clear inflow and outflow table or diagram, you should have the number, right? So you should have the number of revenue, which you can get from chapter 2. You should also have the real number of cost. And the number of the costs as a real number, you can use the technique in chapter 3 to calculate, to estimate it. That's why we said chapter 3 is the fundamental piece for chapter 4, because you really need that cost estimation to describe your inflows and outflows of the cash. Okay. So, chapter number 4, before we learn the cash flow diagram, we want to learn an idea of interest. And the interest is the reason why the time value, the money has time value, why the value of money changes over time. Okay, so at the beginning, I want you to look at this example. Okay, I have 2 deals for you, and I want you to choose which one is a better one. So the first deal is I need to have a small business. Okay, I need money, I need investment. So I suggest that you invest 1,000 to my small business today, and after 5 years I will give you that 1,000 back. That's the first deal. Okay. And the second one is you invest 1,000 to my business today, and after 5 years, I give you 1,500 as a total payback. Well, between these 2 deals, 2 options, which one do you prefer? Think about that. I think it's very easy to decide. Everybody wants to go with the second option, right? Why? Because the second option, you can get your 1,000 investment back. Additionally, you can also get $500, right, as an incentive, or we say as an interest, right? Because in this way, you will have more motivation to lend me this 1,000 as an initial investment. So interest is everywhere right now on today's market, right? That's how people or how businessmen incentive the others to invest money into his own business idea. Without interest, unless you're like close friends or family members, nobody wants to take the risk to just invest some money in your business with just the same payback after many years, because the same amount of money after 10 years or 5 years is not equal to that amount of money today. Okay? 1,000 today is different than 1,000 after 10 years. Absolutely. And 1,000 today worth more than 1,000 after 10 years. We all know that. Because the inflation of the market, because of the opportunity cost that you can invest this 1,000 saving in the bank account, you get interest. You invest this to another better business, you get better interest. So that opportunity cost, you have to consider that, which makes today's 1,000 different or equivalently higher value than the same 1,000 after 10 years. Think about that. That's the time value of money. Okay, so if you don't understand that, you just need to keep that in mind, that 1,000 today is different than 1,000 after 5 or 10 years. Okay, that's the takeaway for today's slides, and we will know like why do we say that. But I hope it makes sense to you. And so interest is very important in this chapter. Interest, we all know interest because we save money in bank account, and a saving account, they have interest rate, right? And if you want to do a loan, you have house loan, car loan, you borrow money from bank, then you need to pay back their the money amount you borrowed, and you have also need to pay back the interest, right? And so interest is very common to our daily life. And so what is interest? Interest is, let me change to a red color. Okay. So interest is the fee. So fee is amount of US dollars, right? That's a number, that's amount of money. It's the fee that a borrower agrees to pay for the use of money. Okay? So interest is the amount of money that you pay back to the person you borrow the money from. Could be a bank, could be a person, could be a company, investment company, right? And the interest is something we use as an incentive, okay, as an incentive payment for the risk opportunity cost. Think about that. So if you ask somebody to invest some money in your business, right, then that person will take a risk. That risk comes from three things. One thing is probably your business or your project could fail, right? If you fail, then it means he probably couldn't get his initial investment back. Like you have a you have a bad business plan, it never worked. Well, this is very very common these days during this uncertain pandemic time. So there is a risk that you couldn't make your plan work out. Then there is a risk there, right? And another risk is from the opportunity cost. So if that person or that bank, they don't want to lend you the money, they don't want to invest in your business, they could invest in another better business, and maybe that better business will give their more paybacks, more compared to yours. So that more additional payback is the risk they have to take. Okay, that's called opportunity cost. And the third risk is from the market itself, the inflation, the unhealthy market, the whole economy situation. It's out of control of individual company or even your project. So there are risks the investor have to take. So if you want to convince them to invest in your business, to let them feel better about taking that risk, then the only thing you can do is you have to provide a higher interest rate or more interest. Okay, so that will balance the risk. And another concept is called interest rate. Interest rate is not that amount of money itself. It is the percentage a percentage. So if interest rate is a rate, it could be 10%, 5%, any percent, okay? It's a percentage of the money borrowed that must be paid back in addition to the original principal, okay? Here, original principal is the initial amount of money somebody invests or you borrowed from the bank or you borrow from a person. That's just the initial amount of money you get. But in addition to that, you need to pay some interest, and the interest is gonna be the product of the interest rate and the initial money you borrowed. So that is interest rate. And so on the market, every day we can see different interest rate. Your saving accounts, if you go check your saving account, you will see your interest rate. It's very low, right? Usually it's like a 2%, around 2%. It could be low, could be higher than that, depending on the market. Okay, and car loans, usually the car loans will be around 4%, 4 to 5%. Home mortgage, if you borrow money for buying a home, right? Then for borrowing that money, you need to pay back the interest at an interest rate. That rate could be around 3%. And credit cards. Wow, go check your credit. If you have a credit card, go check it carefully. You will see that what's the credit card rate. Like if you don't pay off your the money you borrow this month, then you have to pay a high interest rate for the next payment. Okay, but you may wonder what determines the interest rate, right? Because we can see there are all different interest rates. Then what determines that? Well, generally, what determines the interest rate is the market, like how much money or quantity of money on the market. So if you draw this relationship on this X and Y chart, the X axis could be the quantity of money, and the Y-axis could be the interest rate. Then the relationship will be like this green curve. It's going down, okay? Going down means what? Means when the quantity of money goes up, goes to the right side, means when there are more money, cash flow on the market, then the interest rate will be lower. Because there are more money on the market, more people wish to lend or borrow money, and then it's the interest rate will be lower. You don't have to pay too much interest rate to get the money because there are plenty of money out there. Okay? But whenever the money is on the market is less, so it's hard to get money from the bank or get money from a company as an investment. Then you need to provide a higher interest rate to convince that company or that bank or that person to invest. Makes sense, right? So it's determined by the quantity of money on the market. Then the question comes to, how do we calculate interest? Right? If interest is so important, how do we know what is the interest? That's very important. So we have two ways to calculate that. The first method is called, or the first type, I should say that we have two types of interest. One type is simple interest. Okay? Another type is called compound interest. The difference, okay, so simple interest means the interest per period. Period means like how long or how frequently you have to calculate the interest. Okay, so if you save your money in the bank account, usually you have yearly interest rate, which means at the end of every year, the bank will calculate how much interest they should pay you, right? So that interest period will be year. So every year is one period. It could also be every month, okay? Like your credit card. Your credit card will be paid back every month, right? So which means at the end of every month, your the credit card company will calculate how much interest you owe them, okay? And that 1 month is one period. So simple interest means the interest per period is always charged only on the principal. Okay, so the interest is always the initial amount of money you borrowed or you lend to somebody else times the interest rate. That's fixed. So every month or every year, every time you calculate the interest, it's all the same. It's the initial amount, like $1,000 you borrowed, times the interest rate, maybe 10%. So 1,000 times 10%, that will be the fixed interest for every year of every month. Okay, that is called a simple interest. And another type of interest is compound interest, which means the interest per period is charged on the principal plus any accumulated interest. So every time you calculate your interest, it's not just based on the initial amount you borrowed. It's based on the initial amount plus all the previous interest. Okay? So, and the compound interest is very common. It's used almost everywhere because that will give you higher interest every interest period. Think about that. From the beginning of the time when you borrow the money, after every period, you will have the initial interest, the initial amount plus some interest. And based on that, you will have a new interest. So it's like rolling a snowball. It's getting bigger and bigger because the basement of calculating that interest is bigger and bigger. Okay, this might sound very abstract now. So now let's take a look at an example. Okay, so here we have two tables to calculate the interest and how much you owe to the bank. And so now the condition is what? The interest rate is 10%. We use the I as a symbol for interest rate, okay? So interest rate is 10%, means after every month or after every year, depends on how frequently it's calculated, 10% of the initial amount or 10% of the base amount needs to be paid as an interest. Okay? And then we know that the initial principal or the initial amount of money you borrowed from that bank is 1,000. Okay? So this is the given condition. And then we want to manually fill up this form to see what is the amount owed at the beginning of each period and what is the interest amount for that period and what is the amount owed at the end of that period. Here, let's say the period, or how long do we calculate? We calculate it every year. How about that? So period is 1 year, and we have 5 years to pay back. So that's the condition. Okay, so let's do a summary here. So you borrow $1,000 from maybe a bank at the interest rate of 10%. And after 5 years, you have to pay back. Okay? You have to pay back the initial payment and also the interest. And how frequently the bank calculate the interest? We say every year. Okay? So every year, the bank will calculate the interest. Alright, so now we have the two tables. The first table is we use the simple interest method. Or we assume that the bank say, hey, we just use the simple interest type. Alright, now let's calculate what is the numbers in this form. Okay. So the first, this column is the interest period. And we said every year is a period. So after 5 years, we will have how many periods? We will have 5, right? Year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. So you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's your 5 interest period. Okay? That's so in the end of each period, you will calculate, or the bank will calculate how much interest you own. Okay. And all right. So now let's take a look at this cell. The amount owed at the beginning of the first year. So at the beginning, how much you own? You only owe them 1,000, right? Because that's the initial amount you borrow from them. So in this cell, we want to fill 1,000. Makes sense. And for this cell, interest amount for this period. So for simple interest, we said by definition, simple interest means every time you calculate the interest, it will be the initial amount times the interest rate. So what is the initial amount? What is the principal? Principal is the initial amount, okay? So keep that in mind. Let me write it here. Okay, so the interest for the first year will be, by definition, simple interest will be the initial amount, which is 1,000 times the interest rate, which is 10%. So the amount of interest for the first year will be $100. Follow me? Okay, if you don't follow, pause and then rewatch this part. Okay. All right, and then the next cell, amount owed at end of period. So this row is all about the first year. So at the end of first year, how much you owe the bank. So it's gonna be the initial amount or the principal plus the interest, right? Because you have to pay them the investment plus the interest. That's the deal. So it's 1,000 plus that 100 interest. The result will be $1,100 at the end of the first year. Okay? And then after that, you will enter the beginning of the second year. And so at the beginning of the second year, in this cell, how much you owed, that will be the 1,100, right? So you can just copy that number here. And this number is from here. Okay? That makes sense because in the end of the first year, how much you owe will be the amount in the beginning of the second year, right? So, but how about the interest in the second year? We said by definition, simple interest means every time you calculate that interest, it will be the initial amount times the interest rate. So still, in this cell, you still need to use initial amount or principal, 1,000, right? Times the interest rate. So still, it's 100 US dollars. And then the amount owed at the end of the second year will be how much you owe at the beginning, this number, plus the interest. So it's gonna be 1,100 plus 100. That will be what? That will be 1,200 US dollars. Okay, and this 1,200 US dollars will be how much you owe at the beginning of the third year. So enter the beginning of third year, you owe the bank 1,200 US dollars. Okay, and what is the interest in the third year? Still, it's simple interest. So it is, by definition, the interest will be the initial amount or principal times the interest rate. So it's still $100. And so at the end of the third year, how much you owe? You owe the bank 1,200 plus the interest. That will be 1,300. Okay, so we're gonna repeat this. We're gonna put this 1,300 as the amount you owed at the beginning of the fourth year. And in the fourth year, the interest you need to pay is still the principal, 1,000 times the 10% interest rate. So it's 100. And then in the end of the fourth year, how much you owe? You owe them 1,300 plus that interest. And then it's gonna be 1,400. And that 1,400 at the end of the fourth year will become how much you owe at the beginning of the fifth year, right? So in this cell, you just copy that 1,400 US dollars. And the interest, because it's still simple interest, so it's still the principal times 10% interest rate, still it's 100. So at the end of the fifth year, how much you owe in total will be the 1,400 you owe at the beginning of the fifth year plus the $100 as interest. So the total amount you owe at the end of the fifth year is 1,500. And this is the total amount you need to pay back after 5 years to the bank, if the interest is calculated using the simple interest approach. Okay, and you can also calculate the total interest. Okay, so that will be the total additional amount you need to pay back. So in the end of the 5 year, you pay back that 1,000 as a principal plus a total interest. And that total interest will be the sum of this column. We call this column 2, okay? So it's easy to calculate. It's 100 times 5. So it's $500. That's your total interest. Okay. All right, so that's based on the simple interest. And now let's take a look at the compound interest method. If the bank said, okay, we don't want to calculate the interest as a simple interest, we will use the compound interest rate. Okay, so now you need to figure out the new numbers in this form. The condition is the same. You borrow 1,000 from the bank at an interest rate of 10%, but that interest is a compound interest. Okay, and also you need to pay back after 5 years, and the bank will calculate the interest every year. So what is the total payback after 5 years? What is the total interest? Because the simple interest and the compound interest, that by definition they're totally different. So you can imagine that the numbers in these tables could be different. Okay, but let's see how do we fill this up. So still we have how many periods? Because the bank will calculate the interest every year. So for 5 years, the bank will calculate it 5 times. That 5 times will be the period. So we have period 1, that's the year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5. And so the first cell you want to fill is this one. So at the beginning of the first year, how much you owe? That's very easy. That's the $1,000 you borrowed at the beginning. So still, it's 1,000. Okay, and what is the interest for the first year? So by definition, compound interest means every time you calculate interest, you need to use the principal, the initial amount you borrowed, plus the interest in the previous period. But now we're in the first period, first year. So we have not collected any interest at all, which means the interest for the 0 year is 0, right? So that means the interest will be the base of that interest will be 1,000 plus 0 interest in the previous year, right? Times 10%. That's what the definition of compound interest tells you. So this, we call it the base of the interest, or we call it like the principal plus the previous interest. So this number will be 1,000 times 10% will be 100. Okay. And then what is the amount owed at the end of the first year? That will be the initial amount you owed. So 1,000 plus the interest. So it will be 1,100. Okay, so until now, the numbers in the cells are exactly the same as what are in the first table. But don't worry, let's continue, okay? You will see the difference. Now, we enter the beginning of the second year. We said the amount you owe at the end of the first year will always be the amount you owe at the beginning of the second year. So you still can copy that number to this column. Okay, so this cell will be 11,000. That's the amount you owe at the beginning of the second year. And then let's think about the interest. So the interest of the compound interest will be, the principal, the 1,000 plus any previous interest. In our case, in the second year, the principal plus the interest in the first year will be what? Will be 1,000. Will be 11,000, right? Because you have 1,000 plus that 100 as the interest. So that will be your base for the interest. And this will be what? This will be 110 US dollars. Okay, so you see that here are the difference. So this number is still 100 if it's simple interest, but here it is a bigger number. It's 110. Okay, so you can see that every interest period, the bank will get more interest. That's why now the compound period, the compound interest is very, very common. It's very popular, okay? Okay. Now let's take a look at the amount owed at the end of the second year. It will be the amount you owed at the beginning, which is 1,100 plus the interest. Now the interest will be 110. It's not 100, okay? So the total amount you owed at the end of the second year will be 1,210. You see that? So it is also different. Than this number, okay? Which means you have to pay back more if you use the compound interest. Okay, compare these two numbers. You see the difference? All right. Now we will enter the third year. The beginning of the third year, how much you owe. That's how much you owe at the end of the second year, okay? So you copy that number 1210 US dollars here. And what is the interest? That interest will be the principal plus all the previous interest. What are all the previous interest? We have 100 in year 1. We have 110 in year 2. That's your new basement for the calculation. Times 10%. So this number will be 121. Now let's calculate how much you owe at the end of the third year. That will be how much you owe at the beginning of the third year. So 1210 plus the interest in this year. It's 121. How much is it? It's 1331. Okay, do the calculation by yourself. Now let's enter the fourth year. At the beginning of the fourth year, how much you owe? Yes, you owe 1331. That's how much you owe at the end of the third year. Okay, and what is the interest? The interest is, because of its compound interest, so the interest is based on the initial or the principal amount plus all the previous interest. So you got 3 different interests in the past 3 years. You got 100, you got 110, you got 121. That's your new base times the interest rate. And the interest rate is 10%. So the new interest will be 133.1 US dollars. So now how much you owe at the end of the fourth year? It will be what you owe at the beginning of the fourth year, 1331, plus this 133.1 interest. So the total amount will be 1464.1. Okay. Now let's enter the last year, the 5th year. At the beginning of the 5th year, how much you owe to the bank? You owe 1464.1. Okay, just copy that number from here. And then what is the interest? Compound interest, it's based on the initial amount you borrow or the principal plus all the previous interest. So in the previous 4 years, you have 100 as the interest in the first year, you have 110 in the second year, you have 121 as the interest in the third year, you have 133.1 as the interest in the fourth year. That's your new base for the calculation times 10% interest rate. And the amount is 146.41. All right. So now, in the end of the 5th year, how much you owe? You owe them how much you owe at the beginning of the 5th year, 1446.1 plus the interest in the 5th year, 146.41. What's that? That is 1610.51. Now, based on the compound interest, that's how much you need to pay back after 5 years. Did you see that difference? This is $1,610, and in the first table you only need to pay back 1,500. Okay, so this is the difference between a simple interest and a compound interest. Okay, now let's calculate what is the total interest for the compound interest. So the sum of all of this interest will be 100 plus 110 plus 121 plus 133.1 plus 146.41. How much? It's 610.51. Okay, so in the end, the total interest you pay is also bigger or greater than this 500 if you calculate under simple interest. Okay, I hope that you can follow this calculation. Yeah, I know it's repetitive, but the repeating this process will make you understand the difference between the simple interest and the compound interest, and that will give you a better foundation for the future concept and formulas. Okay, so you can pause here and then go back to learn the definition of a simple interest and a compound interest, and then follow this calculation again to see if you can fill up this table by yourself. Okay. And well, you may ask, okay, this table and this process is very long, and the goal of doing this is to help you understand like how the difference, how we can have this difference between these two different interest concept, where it happens. And after you understand this, you might think, okay, do I have to do this complicated calculation every time? Like I have to fill this form every time? What if I borrow the money like for 50 years or 30 years? Do I have to do this like countless times? Well, you don't. This is only to help you to understand the concept And we have formulas or equations for you to use. And no surprise, that equation will give you the same answer. Okay? So now the first equation is the simple interest equation. So we have I equals to Pn and the lowercase I. So the P is what? P is the principal amount lent or borrowed. That's the initial amount you borrowed, or we can say it's principal. It's the initial principal. Okay, sorry, I think I have a typo here. It's a PAL, okay, principal. So P is the initial amount you borrowed. And the N is number of interest periods. Number of interest period is like how many times you calculate the interest. Like in this table case, we calculated 5 times during the 5 years. So the N is 5. Okay? And what is the lowercase I? Lowercase I is the interest rate per interest period. Okay? Like the 10%. So if you want to calculate the simple interest, you need to use the P, principal amount, times the number of interest periods times the interest rate. That's your total interest. And if you want to know the total payback, it should be the P, which is the initial amount you borrow, times the plus the total interest. So P plus I. That's your total payback. Okay? Keep that in mind. And now let's take a look at this. This is exactly the same example as in our table, the first table. Okay? We just want to prove that, okay, using the equation, you're going to get the same exact results. So 1,000 is borrowed at an annual interest rate of 10%. And here we said it's simple interest. For how many years? For 5 years. And so what is the total payback? Okay, total payback, that's the answer. To know that, you need to calculate the total interest, the I, the capital I, and then you calculate total payback. So first, let's just copy this equation. Okay? So I is P, the initial amount you borrow, N times N, the periods, number of periods, times interest rate. And based on this given condition, we know P is what? Is 1,000. That's the initial amount you borrowed. And N, we know because it's 5 years and it's annual interest rate, which means it's calculated every year. So the N is 5, right? And the interest rate is 10%. That's all you know. So replace the PNI by these numbers. The I will be, the capital I will be 1,000 times 5 times 10%. That will be 500. 500. Now let's compare. This is total interest is 500. Wow. It's the same, right? But the equation will give you the answer much quicker. Now, what is the total payback? Or the total amount you owe the bank after 5 years, right? So the total payback is, we said it's P plus I, P plus I, and P is 1,000. I is, we just calculate, it's 500. So the total payback is 1,500. Let's go back to check this. This is the 1,500 you owe at the end of the 5 year. That's exactly the same, but you get the answer much quicker, right? So in the future, when you already understand the difference between compound and simple, you can just use the equation. Now, let's take a look at this compound interest calculation. The equation is much more complicated, but still, it gives you the answer much quicker. Okay, so this is the equation. I is p times 1 plus lowercase I to the power of n, okay, minus the p. Still, the p is the principal amount lent or borrowed, so that's the initial. The initial amount. And n still is the number of interest periods, okay? And I is the interest rate per interest period. So the definition of all the letters are the same, okay? It's just the form of the equation is different. But this equation will give you the total interest of compound interest method very quickly. So now let's apply that equation here in the same example, okay? So 1,000 is borrowed at an annual interest rate of 10% for 5 years. But now the interest is compounded annually, which means it's a compound interest rate and it's calculated every year, okay? So the question is, what is the total payback? Now let's copy this equation, okay? The equation is, if it's a compound interest, I is P times 1 plus the interest rate to the power of n minus P. That's the equation. And based on the given condition, we know the P is 1,000. I is still 10%. N is how many times you calculate the interest. Because it's annual interest rate, it calculated every year. And you have 5 years in total, so the N is 5. Okay? Now let's replace these letters by the values. So I is, P is 1,000 times 1 plus 10% to the power of 5 minus 1,000. So 1 plus 10% is 1.1, right? To the power of 5 minus 1,000. And what is 1.1 to the power of 5? It is, let me use my calculator. So 1.1 to the power of 5 is 1.61. Okay, do the calculation on your calculator, see if you got the same answer. Minus 1,000. So it's gonna be 110 minus 1,000. It's gonna be what? 610. So that's your total interest. And what is the total payback? What is the total amount you owe at the end of the 5 year? We said it's P plus the total interest, right? So P is what? 1,000. Total interest is 610. So the total amount you owe at the end of 5th year is 16110. Now let's go back to check these two numbers in the table. Okay. See that here? That's the total interest, it's 610. And here, the total amount you owed at the end of the 5 years, it's 1610. Okay, 1610. So exactly the same. Okay. Please ignore the decimals because there is a rounding up issue in the calculation because you have a power calculation, but it's the same. So using the equation will give you the answer quickly. Okay. And all right, so this is all about today's class. I want you to truly understand what is the interest and why do we have interest? That's an incentive, right? And also, what is the two types of interest, simple and compound? What's the difference by definition? And also, how can you work out this table by yourself manually? Okay. And based on the understanding of the difference between the simple and the compound interest, can you use these equations, okay, in the example? Using these two equations means you need to find out what is P, the initial amount you borrowed, what is the I, interest rate, and what is the number of periods, like how many times you calculate the interest. Okay, so this is all for today, and in the next class we will learn more about this interest calculation. Okay, so see you next week.